Racist teacher targets black student, but she unveils her true intelligence. In a bright and bustling high school, students filled the hallways with laughter and chatter, eager to start another day of classes. Among them was a determined black student named Maya, who carried her books tightly against her chest as she navigated through the sea of faces. Maya was a diligent and hard-working student, always striving for excellence despite the challenges she faced. But today, she was anxious. She was about to face Mrs. Harris, her notoriously racist teacher. As the bell rang, Maya walked into the classroom quietly, her head held high, but her heart raced with apprehension. She took her usual seat at the back of the room, hoping to go unnoticed. But Mrs. Harris, a middle-aged teacher with a sharp tongue and an even sharper gaze, had other plans. She entered the classroom, scanning the students with a predatory look. Her eyes landed on Maya, and a smirk crept across her face. "Good morning, class. I hope you're all ready for another day of learning," she announced, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Except for you, Maya. I hope you've prepared for the disappointment you're about to bring." The class erupted in laughter, and Maya felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. She tried to ignore the comment, focusing instead on her notes as Mrs. Harris continued her lesson. The teacher made subtle digs throughout the class, consistently belittling Maya's contributions and undermining her efforts. When Mrs. Harris announced the details of the upcoming project, an individual presentation on a topic of their choice, Maya's heart sank. She knew that this was an opportunity to shine, but the teacher's prejudice loomed large. The project would count for a significant portion of their grade, and Maya had heard whispers of how Mrs. Harris favored certain students over others, often giving them more leeway and assistance. "Remember, this project will be a true test of your abilities. I suggest you start working on it early if you want to avoid embarrassing yourself," Mrs. Harris taunted, her eyes flicking toward Maya. Despite the hostility, Maya was resolute. She had faced challenges before, and this time would be no different. As her classmates brainstormed their ideas, she felt the weight of the teacher's prejudice but refused to let it define her. That night, she began to research diligently, poring over books and articles, determined to find a topic that resonated with her. Hours turned into late nights as Maya meticulously crafted her project. She chose to focus on the contributions of black inventors throughout history, a subject that ignited her passion and pride. With each fact she uncovered, her excitement grew, and she poured her heart and soul into the project. She practiced her presentation in front of her mirror, her voice strong and confident, imagining the moment when she would finally share her work. As the day of the presentation approached, Mrs. Harris's disdain intensified. The teacher openly expressed her doubts about Maya's ability to complete the project. "I'll be surprised if you even manage to show up," she sneered, her arms crossed as she addressed the class. Maya felt her determination waver for a moment but quickly steeled herself. She remembered her mother's words, "Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." With renewed focus, she dove back into her preparations, relying on her intelligence and hard work to guide her. Finally, the day of the presentation arrived. As each student took their turn at the front of the classroom, Maya felt her nerves creeping back. She watched as her classmates presented, each receiving encouraging feedback from Mrs. Harris. The teacher's bias was apparent as she lavished praise on some students while offering condescending remarks to others, including Maya. When it was Maya's turn, she stood up with a deep breath, her heart racing but her resolve firm. The class quieted as she began her presentation, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Today, I'll be discussing the significant contributions of black inventors and their impact on our daily lives," she started, her passion evident as she spoke. With each point she made, the classroom became captivated. Maya shared stories of inventors like Garrett Morgan, who invented the traffic light, and Madam C.J. Walker, who built a beauty empire. Her research was thorough, her delivery confident, and the students listened intently, engaged by her passion and knowledge. As she concluded her presentation, there was a moment of silence. Maya looked out at her classmates, who were nodding in appreciation, and then glanced at Mrs. Harris, whose expression was a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Well, that was unexpected," the teacher finally managed to say, trying to maintain her authority. Before she could continue, another student spoke up. "Maya, that was amazing. You really nailed it." The class erupted into applause, and the principal, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "I have to agree with the class," he said, looking directly at Mrs. Harris. "This presentation showcased incredible research and insight. Well done, Maya." Mrs. Harris's face flushed with anger, her authority challenged in front of the entire class. "It's just one project. Let's not get carried away," she retorted, but the damage was done. The students were rallying around Maya, their support evident. As the class ended, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had faced down not just her teacher's prejudice but also her own doubts. With her head held high, she gathered her things and walked out of the classroom, a smile breaking across her face. She had proven her intelligence, silencing the negativity that had sought to hold her back. Outside, her friends congratulated her, and her heart swelled with pride. Maya had unveiled her true intelligence, not just to her classmates, but to herself. In that moment, she knew that she could overcome any obstacle and that her worth would never be defined by someone else's prejudice. As she walked down the hallway, the echo of her classmates' applause ringing in her ears, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had shown them all, especially Mrs. Harris, that determination and intelligence could not be silenced by hate. She was ready to take on the world, one challenge at a time. As Maya continued to prepare for her presentation, the classroom dynamic shifted. The tension between her and Mrs. Harris grew palpable, like a thick fog lingering in the air. The day of the project announcement arrived, and with it, a new wave of anxiety swept through the students. Mrs. Harris stood at the front of the classroom, her arms crossed and her lips curled into a slight smirk. "All right, class, listen up," she declared, her voice ringing through the room. "Today, I'm assigning you a project that will count for a significant portion of your final grade. You'll each need to choose a topic and present your findings in front of the class. It's going to be challenging, so I hope you're all ready for it." Maya's heart raced. This was her chance to showcase her knowledge and determination, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that Mrs. Harris's words invoked. The teacher's reputation for being harsh and unforgiving loomed over her, and the memory of the previous mocking comments made her stomach churn. Mrs. Harris continued, handing out a project outline filled with vague instructions. "You have 2 weeks to complete this project, and I expect high standards," she said, her gaze flickering to Maya. "For some of you, that may be more challenging than others," she added, with a pointed look that sent another wave of embarrassment crashing over Maya. "Remember, I'm here to help, but don't expect me to hold your hand," Mrs. Harris stated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "If you have questions, ask the classmates sitting next to you. They might actually know what they're doing." The other students began murmuring among themselves, their excitement mixing with anxiety. Maya glanced around the room, noticing her classmates discussing potential topics, eager to dive into the project. As they brainstormed, Maya felt a knot forming in her stomach. Would she have anyone to turn to for help, or would she be forced to navigate this challenge alone? As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Maya made her way to her locker, determination surging through her. She refused to let Mrs. Harris's attitude dictate her abilities. After school, she gathered her materials and headed home, ready to start her research. Over the next few days, Maya immersed herself in her project. She spent hours at the library, poring over books about Black inventors and their groundbreaking contributions to society. She found inspiration in the stories of those who had paved the way for her. Every page she turned fueled her passion, and she began to see the project as not just an assignment but a way to honor their legacies. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harris watched with a predatory gaze as Maya worked diligently. During class discussions, the teacher was quick to belittle her attempts. When Maya raised her hand to share her thoughts or ask questions, Mrs. Harris would cut her off or offer vague responses that left her feeling even more lost. "Are you sure you understand the assignment?" Mrs. Harris asked one day, her tone dripping with condescension. "You know, not everyone can handle this level of work. You might want to rethink your approach." Maya felt a flash of anger but swallowed it down. She had worked too hard to let the teacher's words get to her. Instead, she responded with grace, "I'm focusing on the contributions of Black inventors to technology. I believe it's important to highlight their impact. Mrs. Harris raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Well, good luck with that. I'd hate to see you make a fool of yourself. With every passing day, it became clear that Mrs. Harris was determined to sabotage Maya's project. The teacher consistently provided the other students with helpful guidance, offering tips and additional resources to aid their progress. Maya observed her classmates receiving valuable feedback while she was left in the dark. "Can you explain the grading rubric again?" asked one of Maya's classmates, James, who sat in the front row. "I want to make sure I'm on the right track." "Of course, James. It's important to me that you all succeed," Mrs. Harris replied with a smile. She continued to elaborate on the expectations, making sure every detail was clear. Maya felt a tightening in her chest as she watched the interaction. The teacher's double standards were glaringly obvious. As the other students chatted and collaborated, Maya found herself feeling increasingly isolated. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected between her and her peers, all thanks to Mrs. Harris's unyielding bias. In the days that followed, Maya summoned her courage and approached Mrs. Harris after class. She wanted to clarify the expectations for her project and hopefully receive some guidance. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mrs. Harris, could I ask for some clarification on my project?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to make sure I'm meeting your expectations." Mrs. Harris looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, Maya, I didn't realize you were still here. What is it you need help with?" Her tone was sugary sweet, but Maya could sense the sarcasm lurking beneath. "I want to discuss my topic on Black inventors," Maya said, trying to sound confident. "I'd like to know if you have any resources you would recommend or if there's a specific angle you think I should focus on." Mrs. Harris paused, her eyes narrowing as she considered the question. "Well, that sounds ambitious," she replied, her voice laced with skepticism. "But you might want to tone down your expectations. Perhaps something simpler, like one inventor instead of a whole history? You wouldn't want to overwhelm yourself." Maya felt her heart sink. "I appreciate your concern, but I believe I can handle it," she insisted, her determination rising. Mrs. Harris shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't come crying to me when you realize you've bitten off more than you can chew." With that, she turned her back on Maya, dismissing her entirely. Frustrated but undeterred, Maya left the classroom, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to let Mrs. Harris's negativity cloud her determination. She had come too far to back down now. That evening, she sat at her desk, the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she knew she had to push through. Days turned into nights as Maya poured her heart into her project. With each passing hour, her confidence grew. She started crafting her presentation, organizing her research into a compelling narrative that highlighted the ingenuity and resilience of Black inventors throughout history. The stories she uncovered were rich with inspiration, and as she wrote, she felt a deep sense of pride in her work. However, the emotional toll of Mrs. Harris's words lingered. Despite her progress, the teacher's dismissive comments echoed in her mind. "You'll never succeed, you're not smart enough, and don't come crying to me." Each phrase felt like a weight on her chest, but Maya refused to let it crush her spirit. As the deadline for the project loomed, the tension in the classroom reached a boiling point. Mrs. Harris continued to offer helpful guidance to the other students, providing them with extra resources, while Maya felt left behind. The other students were thriving, buoyed by the support of their teacher, while Maya fought against the current, determined to prove herself. When the day of the project presentations finally arrived, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling within her. She knew that this was her moment, a chance to showcase her intelligence and hard work. Yet, the thought of facing Mrs. Harris again made her stomach churn. As she entered the classroom, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Students were buzzing with energy, sharing their projects and engaging in discussions. Maya took a deep breath, reminding herself of her purpose. She was here to prove her worth, no matter what Mrs. Harris had to say. With each student that presented, Maya observed closely. Some of her classmates struggled, while others excelled, receiving glowing feedback from Mrs. Harris. But when it was Maya's turn, she felt a surge of adrenaline wash over her. It was now or never. As she approached the front of the classroom, she could feel all eyes on her, including Mrs. Harris's piercing gaze. Maya steadied herself and began her presentation, sharing the powerful stories of Black inventors and their incredible contributions to society. She spoke passionately, her voice steady as she highlighted their ingenuity and resilience in the face of adversity. The class listened intently, captivated by her narrative. Maya felt the weight of the teacher's expectations lift, replaced by the support of her classmates. She poured her heart into every word, and as she concluded, the classroom erupted into applause. In that moment, Maya knew she had overcome more than just an assignment. She had faced down prejudice and emerged stronger than ever. She had unveiled her true intelligence, and she would not be silenced by anyone, especially not by Mrs. Harris. Despite the discouragement from Mrs. Harris, Maya was determined not to let her teacher's bias dictate her success. As the days progressed, she found herself working late into the night, driven by a fierce desire to prove not just her abilities, but also to challenge the negative stereotypes imposed upon her by her teacher. Each evening after dinner, Maya retreated to her small but cozy bedroom, where a desk cluttered with books, papers, and notes served as her command center. The warm glow of her desk lamp illuminated her focused face, and the faint sound of jazz played in the background created a soothing atmosphere as she settled into her routine. This was her sacred space, a refuge where she could escape the outside world and immerse herself in the stories and achievements of those who came before her. Her late-night research sessions often stretched into the early hours of the morning. Maya dedicated herself to her project, driven by the belief that knowledge was a powerful tool against ignorance. She scoured the internet for resources, combing through academic journals, documentaries, and historical archives. Each new discovery fueled her passion and deepened her understanding of the contributions made by Black inventors throughout history. Maya stumbled upon the story of Garrett Morgan, the inventor of the three-position traffic signal and a revolutionary gas mask. The challenges he faced as a Black inventor in the early 20th century were profound. Not only did he have to contend with systemic racism, but he also faced skepticism and doubt from those around him. Yet, through sheer determination and ingenuity, he was able to create inventions that ultimately saved lives and improved public safety. Maya felt an overwhelming sense of connection to Morgan's journey, realizing that his perseverance mirrored her own. She also discovered the work of Madam C.J. Walker, the first female self-made millionaire in America. Walker's story resonated with Maya deeply. As a woman who rose from poverty to establish a successful business, Walker's tenacity and ambition were inspiring. Maya admired her ability to break barriers and empower other Black women through her products and advocacy. With each page she read, Maya felt a growing sense of empowerment, as if the struggles of these historical figures were giving her the strength to overcome her own. Late into the night, Maya would often find herself scribbling notes, organizing her thoughts, and crafting her presentation. The project transformed into something much more significant than a simple assignment. It became a personal mission. She was determined to shine a light on the brilliance of Black inventors and their impact on society. As she worked, she faced challenges that tested her resolve. There were nights when her eyelids felt heavy, threatening to close against her will, but she fought against the fatigue. Maya knew that rest could wait. She had a purpose to fulfill. Each time she felt the weight of exhaustion creeping in, she would think back to the stories of those who had come before her. Their struggles fueled her fire, igniting a spark of determination within her. Maya's research led her to various multimedia resources as well. She watched documentaries that chronicled the lives of inventors and innovators, absorbing their stories as if they were her own. The visuals brought their journeys to life, illustrating the challenges they faced, the obstacles they overcame, and the triumphs they achieved. These narratives provided her with not just knowledge but inspiration, reinforcing her belief that she, too, could break through barriers. Yet, despite her hard work and dedication, the shadow of Mrs. Harris loomed large in her mind. The teacher's dismissive remarks echoed in her thoughts, making her question her abilities at times. "You won't succeed, you're not smart enough, and don't come crying to me when you fail." Those words were like weights pulling her down, but she learned to silence the negative voices, both external and internal. One evening, as Maya pored over her notes, she felt an unusual sense of clarity wash over her. She realized that her project was more than just about the inventors she was studying. It was about her own identity and her fight against the injustices she faced in the classroom. She decided to weave her personal experiences into her presentation, sharing how their stories resonated with her own struggles. As the deadline approached, she meticulously crafted her slides, ensuring they were visually engaging. She included images of the inventors, diagrams of their inventions, and snippets of their impactful quotes. Maya wanted her classmates to see the human side of these innovators, not just their inventions but also the sacrifices they made to achieve success against all odds. She poured her heart into the project, hoping that her passion would resonate with her audience. Her family noticed the change in her demeanor. Her younger brother, Jamal, often peeked into her room, curious about her late-night endeavors. One night, he found her engrossed in a video about George Washington Carver and his revolutionary agricultural techniques. "What's up, Maya? Why are you always working so hard?" Jamal asked, leaning against the doorframe. Maya smiled, pausing the video. "I'm working on a project for school, and it's really important to me. I'm learning about Black inventors and how they changed the world." "Cool. Are you going to be a scientist or something?" Jamal's eyes sparkled with admiration. Maya chuckled softly. "I don't know about that, but I want to make sure their stories are told. They faced a lot of challenges, just like I do with Mrs. Harris." Jamal's expression shifted to one of understanding. "You're not going to let her stop you, right?" "Exactly. I want to show everyone that I can do this," Maya replied, her voice filled with conviction. As the days turned into a countdown to the presentation, Maya's confidence grew. She practiced speaking in front of the mirror, rehearsing her delivery, fine-tuning her tone, and perfecting her timing. Each rehearsal made her feel more at ease, transforming her anxiety into excitement. She envisioned herself standing in front of her classmates, sharing the stories of these incredible inventors, and the thought fueled her determination. The night before the presentation, Maya felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She reviewed her slides one last time, ensuring everything was in place. The weight of her hard work settled on her shoulders, but this time it felt like a badge of honor rather than a burden. She had poured herself into this project, and she was ready to face whatever came her way. In the morning, as she prepared for school, she took a moment to look in the mirror. She adjusted her hair, straightened her blouse, and looked into her own eyes. "You've got this, Maya," she whispered to herself, her heart racing. "No matter what happens, you've already won by showing up and doing your best." When she arrived at school, the air buzzed with energy. Her classmates chatted excitedly about their projects, and Maya felt a surge of camaraderie among them. She set up her presentation materials in the classroom, her heart pounding in anticipation of the moment when she would share her hard work with everyone. As the presentations began, Maya watched as her classmates took turns in front of the class. Some delivered their projects confidently, while others stumbled through their speeches. She felt a twinge of empathy for them, knowing how nerve-wracking it could be to stand in front of a crowd. Yet, with each presentation, she felt her own excitement building. Finally, it was her turn. Maya stood up, her heart racing as she walked to the front of the classroom. She took a deep breath, looking out at her classmates and Mrs. Harris, who sat with her arms crossed, a skeptical expression on her face. But Maya was undeterred. This was her moment. As she began her presentation, she spoke clearly and passionately about the lives and contributions of Black inventors. She shared Garrett Morgan's story, describing his challenges and the innovations he created. She highlighted Madam C.J. Walker's journey, explaining how she built an empire from the ground up. Maya felt the energy in the room shift as her classmates leaned forward, engaged by her words. She infused her personal experiences into her speech, sharing how their struggles resonated with her own battles against prejudice. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated," she said, her voice steady. "But like these inventors, I refuse to let anyone define my worth or my abilities." As she reached the conclusion of her presentation, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. The applause that erupted from her classmates was overwhelming. In that moment, She knew she had not only showcased her intelligence but also inspired her peers to recognize the importance of resilience and determination. Mrs. Harris, however, remained silent. Maya turned to her teacher, whose expression was unreadable. "What do you think, Mrs. Harris?" Maya asked, trying to gauge her reaction. Mrs. Harris's lips tightened, and for a moment, Maya felt a wave of doubt wash over her. "It was passable, I suppose," the teacher replied, her tone clipped. "But I expected more depth. You could have focused on one inventor instead of spreading your ideas too thin." Maya felt her heart drop for a moment but quickly reminded herself that she had done her best. She had taken a stand and faced her fears. The respect she earned from her classmates meant more to her than any validation from Mrs. Harris. As the class continued, Maya basked in the glow of her accomplishment. Her classmates surrounded her, congratulating her on a job well done. "That was amazing, Maya. You really brought those stories to life," one girl said, beaming with enthusiasm. "Yeah, I didn't know half of that stuff about Garrett Morgan. You made it sound so interesting," another classmate chimed in. Maya felt a warmth spreading through her. Their support was a validation of her hard work and determination. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Maya walked out with her head held high. She had proven to herself and others that she was capable of greatness, despite the obstacles in her path. Later that day, as she recounted her experience to her family at dinner, her parents beamed with pride. "We always knew you had it in you, Maya," her mother said, her voice full of warmth. "You faced that challenge head-on, and that takes a lot of courage." "Thanks, Mom," Maya replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I just wanted to show that no matter what people say, I can achieve my goals." Maya's father chimed in, "You're an inspiration to us all. Keep pushing forward and don't let anyone dim your light." That night, as she lay in bed, Maya felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced her fears, confronted prejudice, and emerged victorious. The journey was far from over, but she had proven to herself that she was capable of overcoming anything that came her way. The experience also ignited a fire within her. She realized that her voice mattered and that sharing the stories of those who came before her was essential. With each passing day, she became more committed to advocating for change, not just in her school but in her community as well. Maya began to envision future projects, exploring ways to raise awareness about Black inventors and their contributions. She thought about organizing an event where students could share their own stories and experiences. She wanted to create a platform where everyone could be heard and appreciated, regardless of their background. As weeks turned into months, Maya continued to excel academically. She joined the student council, using her voice to advocate for diversity and inclusion initiatives in her school. Her determination became contagious, inspiring her peers to stand up against discrimination and support one another. Mrs. Harris's attitude didn't change overnight, but Maya refused to let it deter her. Instead, she focused on the positive impact she could make within her community. She learned to channel her energy into empowering others, reminding them that their stories mattered, no matter how small or big. In the end, Maya's journey was a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of education. She not only proved herself, but also inspired others to rise above their circumstances and embrace their unique identities. Her story became one of strength, courage, and the unwavering belief that true intelligence lies in the heart and spirit of those who dare to challenge the status quo. On the day of the presentation, the atmosphere in the classroom was electric with anticipation. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow that seemed to illuminate Maya's determination. She stood at the front of the class, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to share her hard work with her peers. The moment had finally arrived, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves swirling within her. As she set up her laptop and projector, she could sense the eyes of her classmates on her. Some of them smiled encouragingly, while others appeared indifferent, seemingly unconcerned about the impending presentation. Maya took a deep breath, reminding herself of the late nights spent researching and preparing. This was her chance to show them all what she was capable of. When Mrs. Harris called her name, Maya walked to the front of the classroom, her palms slightly sweaty but her resolve unwavering. She clicked through her slides, and as the first image of Garrett Morgan appeared, She felt a wave of confidence wash over her. She could see a few students leaning in, curious about what she had to say. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to share the stories of some incredible Black inventors who changed the world," she began, her voice steady. "Their contributions are often overlooked, but their impact is undeniable." Maya dove into her presentation, her passion igniting as she spoke about Garrett Morgan's invention of the three-position traffic signal. She described the dangers of the roads before his invention, painting a vivid picture of chaotic intersections and accidents. Morgan's invention didn't just save lives. It transformed how we think about road safety. It's a testament to the fact that one person's idea can change the course of history. As she spoke, Maya noticed her classmates becoming increasingly engaged. Some nodded along, while others leaned closer, captivated by her enthusiasm. She moved on to Madam C.J. Walker, detailing her rise from poverty to becoming a self-made millionaire. Walker didn't just build a business. She created opportunities for countless women, empowering them to embrace their own potential, Maya emphasized, her voice filled with conviction. She could feel Mrs. Harris's gaze upon her, a mixture of skepticism and disdain. The teacher sat with her arms crossed, an unimpressed look on her face. But Maya refused to let that affect her. She was here for her classmates, and she could see their interest peaking. As the presentation progressed, Maya seamlessly transitioned between the stories of various inventors, showcasing their innovative spirits and resilience. She highlighted their struggles against systemic racism and how they overcame immense challenges to achieve success. Each slide was thoughtfully designed, filled with images and quotes that illustrated the inventors' journeys. When she reached the climax of her presentation, Maya took a deep breath and shared her personal connection to the stories. "Like these inventors, I've faced my own challenges in the classroom. There were moments when I felt underestimated, but I've learned that perseverance is key. Their stories inspire me to push forward, to break through barriers, and to never let anyone tell me what I can or cannot achieve." At that moment, the classroom was silent. Maya's words resonated deeply with her classmates, who were captivated not just by her knowledge, but by her courage and authenticity. She finished her presentation with a powerful quote from George Washington Carver: "It is not the style of clothes one wears, neither the kind of automobile one drives, nor the amount of money one has in the bank that counts. These mean nothing. It is simply service that measures success." Maya's heart raced as she concluded her presentation, her voice steady. Let's remember these inventors not just for their inventions, but for their contributions to society and the barriers they broke. We all have the potential to make a difference. As she clicked to the final slide, applause erupted throughout the room. Her classmates stood, cheering for her presentation. Maya felt a rush of emotion as she absorbed their support. She had poured her heart into this project, and it was paying off in ways she had never imagined. Even Mrs. Harris, who had been visibly skeptical throughout the presentation, was forced to acknowledge the applause. Maya glanced at her teacher, who sat in stunned silence, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. The teacher had clearly underestimated Maya, and now it was painfully evident that her assumptions had been wrong. Maya's classmates rushed to congratulate her. "That was incredible! You made history come alive," one girl exclaimed, her eyes wide with admiration. Another student chimed in, "I never knew about these inventors. You really inspired me." The praise felt overwhelming, yet exhilarating. It was as if a weight had been lifted from Maya's shoulders, and in that moment, she knew she had proven herself, not just to her classmates but to herself. She had faced the doubts and challenges head-on and had come out victorious. However, the moment of celebration was short-lived. Mrs. Harris stood up, a scowl etched on her face. "That was certainly creative, Maya," she began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I expected more depth from you. You could have focused on one inventor in more detail instead of skimming the surface with multiple stories. It seems you spread yourself too thin." Maya felt a wave of disappointment wash over her, but she quickly reminded herself of the support she had received from her classmates. They had recognized her hard work and dedication, and that validation meant far more than any critique from Mrs. Harris. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the frustration bubbling within her. I wanted to show the collective impact of these inventors and how their stories intertwine. Each of them faced obstacles, but they all overcame them in their unique ways. Mrs. Harris's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, the principal, Mr. Johnson, entered the room. He had been passing by and overheard the applause. "What's all this excitement about?" he asked, a smile spreading across his face as he took in the scene. Maya's heart leapt at the sight of him. "I just finished my presentation on Black inventors, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. "I highlighted their contributions and how they overcame adversity." Mr. Johnson's smile broadened. "I heard the applause from down the hall. It sounds like you did an excellent job, Maya." He turned to the class. "Let's give her another round of applause." The room erupted in cheers again, and Maya felt her heart swell with pride. Mr. Johnson approached her, extending his hand. "I'd love to hear more about your project. Your passion for these inventors and their stories is evident. It's crucial that we celebrate their contributions to our society." Maya shook his hand, grateful for his recognition. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. It means a lot to me that you appreciate my work." As the class continued, Maya felt a sense of victory that overshadowed Mrs. Harris's criticisms. She had not only showcased her intelligence and hard work, but she had also inspired her peers to think differently about the contributions of Black inventors. Later that day, as Maya walked home, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. The adrenaline of the presentation, the applause, and Mr. Johnson's encouragement all fueled her confidence. She had confronted Mrs. Harris's biases head-on and had emerged victorious, not just for herself, but for those whose stories deserve to be told. Maya realized that this moment was only the beginning. She wanted to continue advocating for the recognition of Black inventors and their contributions, not just within her school but in her community as well. She envisioned organizing workshops, creating a display of Black inventors in the school hallway, or even starting a club dedicated to celebrating diversity in innovation. As she arrived home, she couldn't wait to share her experience with her family. They greeted her with open arms, eager to hear about her day. "You did it, didn't you?" her mother asked, pride shining in her eyes. Maya nodded, her heart swelling with joy. It was incredible. Everyone loved the presentation, even Mr. Johnson. He wants to hear more about it." Her father smiled broadly. "That's fantastic, Maya. We always knew you had it in you. You've shown that hard work pays off, and your voice matters." Maya beamed at her parents' encouragement, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that every effort she had made, every late night spent researching, every moment of doubt she had overcome, had led her to this point. She was ready to continue advocating for change and ensuring that the stories of Black inventors were heard far and wide. As the excitement of the presentation settled, the classroom buzzed with conversations about Maya's performance. Students eagerly discussed the stories she had shared, highlighting the resilience and creativity of the Black inventors. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Maya felt a sense of belonging that had eluded her in the past. Yet, amidst the praise, Mrs. Harris sat in silence, her expression a mix of annoyance and disbelief. After the class ended, the students filed out, their laughter and chatter echoing in the hallways. Maya lingered behind, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the presentation. As she gathered her things, she could feel Mrs. Harris's eyes on her, and an uneasy tension filled the air. "Ms. Johnson," Mrs. Harris called out as Maya turned to leave. The teacher's tone was clipped, and Maya braced herself for whatever criticism was coming her way. "Yes, Mrs. Harris?" Maya replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "I want to talk to you about your presentation," the teacher said, her demeanor colder than usual. "While it was enthusiastic, I still think you missed the mark. Your approach was too broad. You should have focused on one inventor and provided deeper analysis." Maya felt her cheeks flush. She had anticipated this response, but hearing it from Mrs. Harris stung nonetheless. "I wanted to highlight the collective contributions of several inventors to show their interconnectedness," she replied, her voice firm. "Your classmates may have enjoyed it, but it lacked academic rigor," Mrs. Harris countered, crossing her arms. "I expected better from you." Before Maya could respond, a voice interrupted. "Actually, Mrs. Harris, I thought Maya's presentation was brilliant. It was Brian, a classmate who had been one of the first to applaud her. She made those inventors' stories relatable and inspiring. We need more of that in our curriculum. Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you, Brian," she said, smiling. Mrs. Harris's expression hardened. "This isn't a popularity contest, Brian. It's about education and standards," she snapped. "And if you can't adhere to those standards, you won't succeed in this class." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Maya and Brian in stunned silence. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next period, and the classroom emptied out, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered. As the days passed, whispers about Maya's presentation circulated throughout the school. Students talked about her bravery in sharing the stories of Black inventors and how she had stood up against Mrs. Harris's criticisms. Maya noticed more students approaching her in the halls, eager to discuss her presentation and share their own ideas. She felt empowered, realizing that her voice was beginning to matter more than she had ever thought possible. However, Mrs. Harris's resentment toward Maya grew. The teacher became more passive-aggressive, making snide remarks during class discussions and assigning increasingly difficult tasks that seemed aimed at undermining Maya's confidence. But Maya remained undeterred. She had her classmates' support, and that buoyed her spirits. Then came the day when Maya overheard a conversation between two teachers in the faculty lounge. They were discussing the curriculum and the importance of diversity in education. "I think it's great that students like Maya are stepping up to share these stories," one teacher remarked. "We need to embrace those voices and encourage them." But Mrs. Harris interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. Maya's presentation was just fluff. If she wants to succeed in this world, she needs to understand that education requires rigor, not just emotion. There's a reason why standards exist. Maya's heart sank as she listened. She felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over her. How could Mrs. Harris be so dismissive of something so vital? She had poured her heart and soul into that presentation, and it felt as if the teacher was determined to undermine her at every turn. That afternoon, driven by a mix of determination and frustration, Maya approached Mr. Johnson, the principal. She explained the situation, sharing her experiences in Mrs. Harris's class and how her teacher had consistently belittled her efforts. "I believe that education should celebrate diverse voices, not silence them," Maya stated firmly. Mr. Johnson listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Maya. It's essential that we support our students and create an inclusive environment. I'll look into this matter." Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had taken a stand, and now the principal was aware of the situation. Perhaps this would lead to change, not just for her but for other students who felt marginalized. As the weeks went on, the atmosphere in the classroom began to shift. Word had spread about Maya's presentation and the challenges she faced with Mrs. Harris. Many students began to rally behind her, sharing their own experiences of feeling overlooked or dismissed. The classroom discussions transformed into open dialogues about diversity, representation, and the importance of inclusivity in education. One day, during a class discussion about inventors and their impacts, a student asked, "Why don't we have more projects like Maya's? It's important to learn about all kinds of contributions to our society." Maya felt her heart swell with pride. She had sparked a movement, encouraging her peers to think critically about the content they were learning and to demand more representation. Mrs. Harris, however, remained stubborn and unyielding. Instead of embracing the change, she continued to resist. Her attitude didn't go unnoticed, and soon enough, the principal received several complaints from students and parents alike, voicing concerns about her teaching methods and her dismissive attitude toward diversity. Then came the day when the principal called a meeting with Mrs. Harris to address the growing concerns. Maya sat in the front row of the assembly, her heart racing. She felt a sense of anticipation, knowing that this meeting could lead to significant changes. As Mr. Johnson spoke about the importance of fostering an inclusive environment for all students, Maya felt a sense of vindication. She had stood up for herself and her peers, and now her voice was being heard at the highest level. By the end of the meeting, it became clear that Mrs. Harris's resistance to change had left her isolated. The principal emphasized the need for professional development regarding diversity and inclusivity in the classroom. It was evident that Mrs. Harris's teaching methods were not aligning with the school's mission, and the consequences of her actions began to unfold. After the meeting, whispers of Mrs. Harris's potential consequences circulated among the staff and students. Maya felt a sense of satisfaction as she realized that the teacher's attempts to sabotage her had only exposed her own shortcomings. Mrs. Harris's refusal to adapt and embrace change left her vulnerable, and the support Maya had gained from her peers was a testament to the strength of unity and resilience. As the school year progressed, the classroom atmosphere continued to evolve. With the principal's encouragement, students began to engage in discussions about diversity, and Mrs. Harris was required to undergo training to help her better understand the importance of inclusivity in education. Maya felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not only had she proven herself in the classroom, but she had also catalyzed a change that would benefit future students. She had transformed her struggle into a movement, inspiring others to find their voices and stand up against injustice. Maya's journey was far from over, but she now understood that her story was one of empowerment, resilience, and the importance of advocating for change. With every challenge she faced, she became more determined to ensure that every student's voice was heard and every story was celebrated. In the aftermath of the meeting, Maya felt a sense of calm wash over her. The atmosphere in the classroom had changed dramatically. Her peers were more engaged and encouraged to share their own experiences. As she packed her bag, she couldn't shake the excitement from her successful presentation and the unity it had sparked among her classmates. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Maya took a moment to reflect. She had entered the classroom as a quiet student, overshadowed by the racism and dismissiveness of her teacher. Yet, she had transformed into a beacon of resilience and determination, inspiring those around her to embrace their voices. As she walked toward the exit, Maya glanced back at Mrs. Harris, who was sitting at her desk, her face flushed with embarrassment. The teacher was grappling with the consequences of her actions, the once dominant figure now reduced to a mere observer of Maya's triumph. The tables had turned, and it was evident to everyone in the room that Maya's intelligence and hard work had overshadowed any attempts to undermine her. Maya stepped outside into the fresh air, her heart swelling with pride. She had proven herself not only as a capable student but also as a catalyst for change within the school. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but she emerged stronger, armed with a newfound confidence and the unwavering support of her peers. As she walked down the hallway, she overheard whispers of admiration from her classmates. They spoke about her bravery, her dedication, and how she had stood up against the injustices that had plagued them all. Maya felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that she had not only made her mark but had also inspired others to stand tall. In that moment, Maya realized that her battle was not just hers alone. It was a shared experience, a collective fight for recognition and respect. She had proven that intelligence, hard work, and determination could break through the barriers of prejudice. The respect she earned from her peers and the acknowledgement of her worth were far more significant than any criticism she had faced. As she left the building, the sun shining brightly overhead, Maya looked forward to a future where her voice, and the voices of others like her, would be celebrated rather than silenced. With each step, she felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of doubt that had once held her back. In that moment, she understood that true strength lay not only in her accomplishments but in her ability to uplift those around her. With a heart full of hope and determination, Maya embraced the challenges ahead, knowing she would continue to pave the way for herself and others in the pursuit of knowledge, respect, and equality. Maya walked away, leaving behind the shadows of her past, ready to face whatever came next. She was no longer just a student. She was a force to be reckoned with, an advocate for change, and a true embodiment of resilience. As Maya stepped into the sunlight, she felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment and hope. She had not only proven her intelligence but had also become a beacon of strength for others. The weight of the past lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the excitement of the future. Her journey was just beginning, and she wanted to share it with the world. If you've enjoyed this story of resilience and triumph, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring tales. Your support helps amplify voices that deserve to be heard. And we want to hear from you. Comment below with your thoughts and stories of overcoming challenges. Together, we can create a community that celebrates diversity and empowers each other. With a heart full of gratitude, Maya took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that her story, and the stories of countless others, would continue to inspire and ignite change.